Hello everyone and welcome back to another Tribe tutorial. Today we're going to talk about some of the basic kite flying skills that are useful to you if you want to practice at home or in the park. That includes talking about the wind window and how a kite works in and flies in the sky, and also getting out a small little trainer kite. You can pick one of these up from Slingshot. They've got nice little trainer kites which are really good to give you some good flying skills. So as I said, today we're going to be talking about the wind window. Now the wind window is the physical space in the sky that you can fly a kite. So I'm just going to demonstrate this and talk this to you physically with my body just to give you a bit of an understanding of how the wind window works and where it is. And then we'll move on to the beach. I'm going to illustrate it to you in the sand as well to give you a second look at it. So when a kite flies, it works very similar to that of a wing of an aeroplane. I want you guys to imagine the wind is coming from where the camera sits at the moment. And that wind is going to flow over the top and underneath the bottom of the kite. And because of the change in pressure there, you get lift and the kite floats in the sky. Now that word float is very key because one of the biggest questions we get when people are booking to do kitesurfing lessons here at Tribe Watersports is what happens if I get blown away? Well, the good news is the kite doesn't naturally actually want to have power in it. The kite has lift and it floats, but that word lift isn't enough to lift you off the ground essentially. It is enough for the kite to fly in the sky. So when you look at this kite, I want you to have a consideration about some of the parts of the kite. The front of the kite, which is represented by my thumb here as we call the leading edge, and the palm of my hand is the canopy of the kite. And as I said, we have lift. The kite floats in the sky. So as I said, the wind's coming from the camera here. I'm going to turn my back to the wind because whenever you're flying a kite, you have your back to the wind. And as that kite flies above my head here like so, imagine my arms or my arm is the lines here, the kite is essentially just floating in the sky. There is no power in the kite. It is floating there. And the great news is the kite naturally wants to sit in this position above my head. So if I steer the kite very gently and very softly to the left or to the right hand side of this point above my head here, the kite has lift, it is floating in the sky, but it has no power in the kite because none of the actual canopy of the kite is exposed to the wind. So we've got this area in the sky where the kite naturally wants to sit, where the kite floats in the sky, but it has no power. And even if the kite was to take off by mistake, the kite is always trying to head to what we now call the edges of the wind window. And this is the start of our wind window theory here. This is the edge of the wind window where the kite flies and it has no power. So we're now going to look at our foil kite, our trainer kite. This is a great tool to practice getting your kitesurfing skills up to scratch. 90% of kitesurfing is flying and managing the kite, so being able to control that kite effectively is absolutely key. And getting some time out in a park using a foil kite like this Slingshot one, it's a 1.5 meter, it's called a B2, is a great way of you practicing kitesurfing outside or off the beach or when you're at home in the city. I'm just going to jump straight to having this kite set up rather than going through the whole process of setting up a foil kite. They're very straightforward to set up and the instructions are generally in the bag. So I'm just going to talk you through the different aspects or the different parts of the kite just so I can relate to them later on. The top of the kite where you can see those white bits on amongst the black is called the leading edge. The lines coming off the kite are called the bridle lines, and then the back of the kite where I've weighed it down with sand here is called the trailing edge. Connected to that I've got two sets of lines that now run down all the way down the beach to the bar. So here we are at the kite bar. When you look at the kite bar, you'll notice a few things. First of all, we've got a brand on the top side of the bar to illustrate the top of the bar. There's nothing on the bottom, as you can see here. And then we have two leader lines. We've got a red one on the left-hand side, and you've got a green one on the right-hand side. 95% of the time, you're going to find red is on the left. Some brands have decided to go with a different routine, but you'll generally find red on the left-hand side when you're flying a kite. You'll have another color on the right. It could be blue, it could be gray, or it could be green, as we have in this instance. Now when I'm about to launch my kite, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little step back, and you can see the leading edge of the kite is starting to point up into the wind slightly, and I'm going to take a step back and this kite is going to fly in the direction it's pointing. And then there's a big fundamental part of kite flying is the kite's always going to fly where the leading edge is pointing. So as you'll see, as I'll take a step back here now, the kite's going to fly straight up above my head into the sky to what we call the 12 o'clock point. So what I'm going to do now, before I start talking about how to fly this kite, I'm going to start walking you through what we call the wind window. So at the moment, the kite is flying quite comfortably along the edge, at the top of the wind window, at what we would call 12 o'clock. Now we can fly this kite parallel to our bodies, anywhere over on the right-hand side here as I bring it down to the right-hand side. And you can see the kite is just floating quite comfortably in the sky there. It hasn't got any power and the kite's just floating nice and gently there. It might luff a bit as it gets a bit closer to the beach. And I'll start to bring the kite up again slowly, anywhere along what we call the edge of the wind window. That leading edge points into the wind, and the kite has no power. It just floats nice and gently in the sky. Don't worry about how I'm steering it for the time being, but you can see it's almost even struggling to fly as it has very limited power as the kite sits along the edge of this wind window, this fundamental area that we fly a kite in the sky. Now, in order to get power out of my kite, I need to expose the canopy. So the word slingshot there is written across the canopy. I need to expose that to the wind, and I do that by steering the kite a little bit more aggressively. And the kite starts to dive down in front of me here. And as the kite starts to dive down in front of me here, I start to receive some more power out of the kite as that kite flies through the wind and that canopy becomes exposed to the wind. Now, as I said to you before, the kite will always fly with the leading edges pointing. So if I steer the kite above my head and stop steering it, it will fly back to that 12 o'clock point. Remember that clock visual. We have 12 o'clock above our head. We have 1, 2, and 3 on the right, and 11, 10, and 9 on the left. And this area, as I said, is the area that the kite can fly in the sky and what we call our wind window. So now we've had a go at flying a trainer kite and talked about the wind window in theory. I just want to illustrate the key points of it to you just so you can visualize it on the beach here. So the first thing we need to take into consideration is the wind, which is coming from this direction today like so. And that's us standing in the middle of the beach. And as I said earlier, whenever you're flying a kite, you always want to have your back to the wind. Our beach is this line here. And that edge of the wind window that we talked about earlier, that no power zone, is this semicircle in front of me here, like so. When we're looking at the edge of the wind window, we talked about a clock face. So above my head, we call 12 o'clock. We've got 1, 2, and 3 o'clock on the right, 11, 10, and 9 o'clock on the left. So you'll hear this clock face being mentioned a number of times whenever you're learning to kitesurf, be it if you're learning to jump or if you're learning to do your first body drags. It's something that people talk about a lot. And then the final aspect of the wind window is the power zone, which is this area in front of us here. As you saw, we were flying the foil kite, as we were diving the kite lower in the sky and getting that canopy exposed to the wind, the kite got more power, and then we call this area the power zone. I'm not sure how well you can read that, but that's what it says. The final thing we talked about, is the line that cuts the wind window in half. And we think about that line, I'm just going to move that out of the way. We think about this line here to give us a sense of direction with the kite. If I want to go to the right-hand side of the wind, I'm going to dive my kite up and down solely on the right side of the wind window. And that's going to generate pull in a right-hand direction. If I want to get power on the left-hand side of the wind and pull myself to the left, I'm going to dive the kite solely to the left-hand side of this line. So from 12 o'clock down to the ground, and that's going to generate power to the left-hand side. As I said, this is something that you're going to review a number of times as a beginner kitesurfer or even as an advanced kitesurfer when you're learning to do any new maneuver or trick, or even if you're learning to get on the board for the Let's now look at how we're going to steer the kite back and forth. Notice my hands are nice and wide on the bar here. If you want to slow this process down, you can put your hands closer towards the middle of the bar, and that will make the turning slower. Notice how I'm pulling on the lines, and this is the key bit. I'm pulling at the end of the bar, which directly pulls on the line corresponding to that side of the kite. So pulling on the right-hand side here, and then pulling on the left-hand side here. Try and visualize the bar as a bit like a handlebar of a bicycle, as opposed to that of a steering wheel of a car. The key here is pulling on the end of the line, or the bar, to pull the lines, and not twisting the bar to twist the lines. What I want to do is give you 3 exercises that you can work on with your foil kite. The first one is the basic kite surfing skill, and that's doing a figure of 8 motion with your kite back and forth in front of you, either side of 12 o'clock in the sky, dipping that kite in and out of the power and getting used to a consistent steer, diving the kite back and forth. So we're diving the kite from 11 over to 1, to 11 and over to 1. And really think about where you're pointing the kite as you steer it, where you're pointing that leading edge. If I bring it to 11 and steer the kite to the left and bring it to 1 and I steer the kite to the left and bring it to 11, you can see I point the kite in that direction. I'm actually not pulling on the bar the whole way through this process. I pull, I wait. I pull, I wait. It's all about patience, kite surfing, taking your time and small, fine adjustments. The second exercise, this is your fundamental kite surfing exercise. It's generating power to one side. So if I want to power myself over towards the right-hand side, in this instance, take myself out to sea, I'm going to dive my kite up and down just on the right-hand side of the wind window. Now this one is a little bit more daunting because you're diving it down towards the ground. So quite commonly you find people tend to fight the kite at this stage because they're worried about crashing it. Just trust in your ability to steer the kite. Steer the kite down to the right or point the leading edge down. Point the leading edge back up again, back to 12 o'clock. Down to the right, back up to 12 o'clock. Again, notice I'm not always pulling on the bar. I'm only pulling on the bar to point the kite where I want it to fly, and then I let it go there. I'm doing nice large figure of eights on the right-hand side of this wind window, generating power over to the right, and then vice versa. On the left-hand side, I'm doing the same thing, down to the left, back up to 12, down to the left, back up to 12. And when you're doing this, you want to let the kite rise before you dive. Always let the kite come up before you take it back down again. That way you're going to get the most power out of the kite. And then finally, the last exercise that you can practice with your foil kite is just flying the kite with one hand, keeping the kite nice and stable in the sky and getting used to keeping the kite steady. At this stage, you don't need to be steering the kite around. You don't want to be steering the kite with one hand. Flying a kite one-handed is all about keeping the kite nice and steady. So that's the end of our foil flying tutorial for today. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments below and click that subscribe button and the like button. That always helps us grow the channel and get more videos out to you in the future. See you on the beach.